Welcome. I'm Stephanie Banky, and this is Conversations That Connect, a discussion series that brings together the folks who are moving our industry forward. Joining me today is Margie Dillion, former Chief Financial Officer and Chief Customer Officer at Liberty Mutual Insurance, who today serves on a variety of boards. Margie, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Stephanie. Pleasure to be here.
I think about all of the AI that's being introduced into our industry and how we talk about further automating customer experiences. And a couple of things pop to top of mind. The first is that customers are starting to say that insurance specifically is about both the experience and the price. And that a third of customers would actually leave a brand after one bad experience. And so I'm kind of curious how you feel about, how do we, while automating, how do we make sure that the experiences get better, not just faster?
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge. I think the key is constant listening and feedback from the customers. I'm a huge fan of the design of the customer experience. I think that a lot of times there's a tiny piece of the customer experience that people focus on solving, and it's not enough. It's a pretty complicated product, we know. And a lot of times, if you do it piecemeal and don't think end to end, it's going to kind of fall flat. On the comment that I think a lot of customers say they'll leave after one bad experience, I'm not quite sure they actually do, but it doesn't mean we can't strive to make the customer experience better. And let's face it, there's so many interactions outside of insurance that are influencing them, and we have to react to that.
Yeah. I think about our industry has historically kind of been a low trust industry. And so I'm curious how the customer experience, I feel like it's been hard for us to get like the right customer experience. And I'm just kind of curious, why is that and how did we get here?
Yeah, so if you think about it, insurance isn't a tangible product, right? It's a promise, and it's complicated. You get a policy that is has a lot of jargon in it. So I think the part of the root problem is customers don't really understand what it is that they have. So they buy their policy, they might tuck it away, and then comes time to have to use it when they have a claim. And there's a disconnect because they realize the coverages, they didn't really understand what they bought. Sometimes it's because during the buying process, they're hearing about choices that they're making in terms of deductible levels or whatever. So they've made a choice themselves, but they didn't realize the implication of that choice that they've made. And sometimes it's just, the jurisdictions, everything is so unique at a state level, and there's a lot of interoperability between the coverages that people have. And I think it's just, it's pretty opaque. So I think that's what makes the customer experience difficult. It takes a really clear, I think we need the legal backbone of the policy, but at the same time, we need that layer over it that makes it much more transparent to the customer.
Yeah, I think that's something that I have struggled with my entire, 38 career in the industry is how do we say what we really mean without getting the legal language all twisted up? It's like collision is, if you hit something, comp is if something hits you, like how do we simplify it so people really understand what they're buying so that we don't have this friction, particularly in the claims process, right? When it's that moment of truth, that promise that you talked about, and then people are saying, I didn't know I had $1,000 deductible. Gosh, I have to pay $1,000 first before you'll pay. That can be really, really confusing. And I think you're right. I think that does sort of ebb away at the trust a little bit. And I feel like as we go into more automation, there is a real fear in our industry that we will put that customer experience in further jeopardy. Do you think that concern is justified?
I don't know. I think there's so much technology that's out there now. I think that there are tools that could be used that actually make it better. Now, my days of designing customer experience are done, but just imagine that instead of all these words, somebody figured out a different way of conveying the coverages to someone. And I know carriers are trying to do that, but making it even easier for people to understand, really, really super simple. I think, again, visual aids, people learn differently and absorb differently. So I think there's probably somebody out there in one of the insure techs that's probably trying to do this, and somebody inside insurance companies are trying to do this. But I think if we're not careful and people are using technology and AI just to automate things and make things more efficient, then I think we will fail in the customer experience. But I don't think that that's going to be the case, because at the end of the day, I think it depends on how a carrier measures customer experience. But the ultimate measure is, are you retaining your customers?
Yeah. Yep. Where do you draw a line? As I talk to industry professionals, one of the things I consistently hear is sort of how is everybody else drawing a line between automation and efficiency and empathy, right? Are there any, I think people are sometimes looking for a silver bullet. Are there any transaction types? Are there certain things that we just simply should not automate?
Yeah, so this is my personal opinion. I think that there's probably a certain severity of a claim, and perhaps a type of claim that you shouldn't, severe bodily injury,
Yeah.
total loss of a home, those type of things. But I think that this is something that the carrier themselves, what is the culture of the company, and what is it that they want to, they have a brand, what is it that they want to, at a minimum, say this is something that we are committed to always going face to face to the customer in these cases.
Yep. And I think one of the things you talked about earlier, taking a holistic look, I think as I think about that experience, a claim is not one and done in one day, right? And so there are probably pieces and parts of that claim that could still be automated later, right? But in the beginning, making sure that you have a connection with somebody and that the injured party, has someone they can communicate with and talk to right away, right? And it feels like other pieces and parts might be able to be automated later on. And I think finding those pieces has sort of been challenging for us as an industry. Um, we talk a lot about great customer experiences. What do you think that really looks like in a claims experience or in a service experience?
So I think the first thing everybody has to really realize is customer preferences vary widely. So I think you have to think about, there's not just one experience. I think it depends on the persona that you're dealing with. So some people want it, they don't want to not have any empathy, but they don't want a lot of chit chat. They want it to be very once and done. They might be a do-it-yourselfer. They want to do as much as they can online, and they don't really need to interact with anyone. So that's one. But I think overall, what a good customer experience on the claim side is that there is a fair treatment of the claimant. It does not take an exorbitant amount of time. Now, I'm not going to put an exact time frame on it because, as you know, claims can vary tremendously. And then I think that there's an understanding that there's an expertise that look at people in the insurance carrier are dealing with claims, thousands of claims. When you're a claimant, you're a party of one that is experiencing this. So I think the communication and the explanation, whether it's via a human or some other mechanism, has to be super clear to set expectations accordingly.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes I feel like it's really hard for us to design those experiences when we've been doing this for so long and making sure that, I joke sometimes that can it pass the grandma test? If your grandmother was going to walk through it, would the process still make sense, right? And would you find a human where you needed a human, or would a human at least be easy to get to in that moment of need? And I think that makes a lot of sense. Um,
Stephanie, can I just add one thing? I
oh,
found it
please.
really effective back when I was involved in this, bringing in people from, so a lot of times the customer experience, there's one group that's kind of charged with the customer experience. And I think bringing in other people to get their perspectives. So how are we designing this customer experience? Are we designing it from the inside out or from the outside in? And just challenging every little teeny step along the way, it makes a huge difference. And even in terms of when you're hiring for people for this, bringing people in with different backgrounds that don't know insurance. Sometimes they have the really good insights on things that can be changed without messing up regulatory requirements.
Yeah, I think that's such a great example because I feel like even the language that we use, I was talking to somebody recently and they said, well, the customer just didn't, they never released their car. You know, I told them several times, you need to release your car. And if I'm a consumer who's never had an accident before and I'm told I'm told in maybe an email or something, you need to release your car, I have no idea what that means. But we use that language all day long, and so it becomes very comfortable for us. So to your point, somebody from outside of the industry taking a look at that experience, if that had been maybe an automated experience, would be able to point out, I don't know what you want me to do here, right?
Exactly.
If you want me to call a body shop and tell them somebody is about to move my car, I can do that all day long.
Right.
So just using that language, just tell me to call a body shop and give permission for my car to be moved. It makes it so much easier. And I think sometimes we get tangled up a little bit in the complexity of our own industry, right?
Exactly. I think the one last thing that I'll add is I think a lot of times from a policyholder's perspective, they think they're calling their insurance company and that's the only interaction that they're going to have. And as you know, there's a lot of parties involved in settling a claim oftentimes. And I think to the extent that those friction points with every handoff to the customer can be smoothed out, it will really go a long way to make a much better customer experience.
Yeah, and I love that. And I feel like even just the introduction, I've seen some carriers do a beautiful job of this, and another company is going to come to your home to inspect it,
Mhm.
or you expect a call from so and so at this organization because they'll schedule X for you, right? Just making sure that people are clear on the process because it isn't actually getting easier. I feel like it's getting more complex. It's getting better, and in a lot of ways, it's getting faster, but there's a lot of complexity introduced into that process now as well.
Sure.
So it's still, I think, still that golden rule of managing expectations is probably still works today, just like it did years ago.
Exactly.
Um,
Without over communicating.
Without overcoming, yes, yeah, and also, you mentioned persona earlier, and I feel like sometimes when we begin a relationship with a policyholder, we ask them for certain preferences. That might be a communication preference. It might, I mean, we ask all kinds of questions in the beginning, and we store that profile. And I think that's great. I also think that every incident or interaction is different. And the preference that I chose 3 years ago when you met me might not be today when my example, maybe I deleted a car and a driver from my policy and yet my renewal is up. I'm getting this bill for this huge amount, but I know I just took a car and a driver off the policy and it should be less, right? But the renewal's tomorrow. So I'm already coming into that particular interaction with a heightened sense of stress than all the other, billing transactions where I said, yeah, you can just communicate to me this way. So I think each individual, I think we have to keep revisiting those preferences and then always have in mind that was a preference then, but where is this individual right now in their journey?
Agreed. And again, back to technology, to have something that can capture the sentiment when the policyholder is interacting at that moment, just to give you a little bit of a sense. Is this coming in hot? What's the
Right.
what's the current feeling of this policyholder? I think that is also important.
Yep. So I think carriers are doing a lot right in automating these processes. Is there anything that maybe carriers are missing the mark on today?
Look, I think a lot of a lot of insurance companies have a lot of data, and it's orchestrating all that data so that it can be useful as a tool for the person interacting with the customer. I think sometimes, I think there's been it's way, way better than when I first joined insurance a long time ago. But I think that there's some nuance in that. And what, with all this data, what is really important to know about this customer when I'm interacting that's relevant and not get lost in this barrage of information. So again, having a tool that can lift up what's important to know, what the context, I think, is very important. And I think that's missing. And then if you have to, if the policyholder has to interact a second time, and it's like the person who's getting them has no idea that there was just a recent interaction, that's like, that should have been fixed a while ago.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think technology can help us get to what's important to me right now. Like I remember when, as carriers, we were all trying to grab maybe every communication we'd have with that customer. So when somebody answers the phone, I have this entire history of every conversation they've had. And that's overwhelming. Like you can go from nothing, I know nothing, and I pick up the phone blind, or I go to, I've got all the history of their communications with me. And to your point, that's not what I need right in this moment, right? I know that they're calling, maybe I know from their selection in IVR, they're calling it's a billing problem. And so just give me the facts that are pertinent to this particular interaction versus, like this entire history. And again, I think AI and other technology can help us get to that and really present that so that the CSR or the adjuster or the underwriter can deal with just the information or the data that they need to at that moment.
Totally agree.
So insurance is such a trust-driven business. What can companies design, or how can we design our automation today to make sure that what we do builds trust and doesn't erode it?
Yeah, it's tough. I don't think it's a panacea or it would have been fixed already. But I think, again, back to really capturing, again, I think it starts at the first off, the company's culture has to really be, we want to make this customer experience superb, and we want to show that we are compassionate and whatnot. And I think it means being as transparent. Transparency, I think, is super important, and not a lot of verbatim. I think there's a difference between transparency and but having an ability to give the customer an idea of, look, here's what you have, and here's the gaps, and know that these are the risks that you're now taking on yourself, as opposed to you don't have coverage for them. So I think again that erodes trust when you don't have an understanding of where the holes are, if you will, or where the gaps are. And I think some, insurance companies, I think, are trying to wrestle with that. But again, on the consumer side too, people are, I think a lot of times people just want to renew their policy. They don't want to take the time when there's a life event or something going on. So there's an ownership on the customer side too, but it manifests itself, it can collide with them not doing their end of keeping things updated. So it's a slippery slope, but I think that there's definitely progress being made. And I think if the perception changed that it wasn't going to be this, oh my gosh, I have to call my insurance company to get some advice. It's almost like there's a dread. I think if it really was viewed as there's some expertise that they can give and they can actually help, I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I've been in the business my entire career, and my property policy, I had not looked at it, Margie, in like 15 years. I bought it when I bought my house, over 23 years ago. And I realized I was making some life changes, and I realized I hadn't looked at, and it's like, oh my gosh, personal property is way off. I mean, I'm in the business, and I hadn't talked to my agent in years. Right. And then when I did look at it, I realized kind of how out of whack it was, and made the necessary judgments and decisions. But that's tough to do if this isn't what you do for a living.
Sure, sure. And I don't think a lot of people just they want to set it and forget it, and they don't want
Right. Yep. So what do you think people can take away from our conversation today that can really, what can they do on Monday to sort of improve that customer experience overall?
Yeah, I think it's, are they really, looking at the customer experience data, whatever that is, and being honest about where the pain points still are that they may think that they had addressed, but the customer is telling them. So they really have to be honest with the results of the data that they have and say, hey, wait, we really haven't. We think this might have, we might have a superlative product, but it really isn't because look, we have this data that's telling us that there's. So I think that's something that a takeaway, just constantly revisiting what the customers listen, what the customers are saying, and and have a strategy of how you're going to go about solving those.
Right. And a question I ask every guest is if you could change one thing about our industry, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, this whole trust thing, I mean, personally, I mean, I spent almost a quarter of a century. It bugs me that that is the perception of the insurance industry. I really wish that could melt away. And I'm not sure all the ways that, we could do that, but I think technology, I think, can help. And um, that would be to be an industry that people, I mean, obviously everybody needs it. But I think to get rid of that cloud over the lack of trust is something that I would love to see.
Yeah. And I think it would also help us recruit the very best talent into our industry as well, right? If it
Absolutely.
didn't have sort of that tinge to it. Thank you so much, Margie, for joining me today. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Stephanie.
Thanks.
Bye bye.